The courtroom was full that morning. People sat on wooden benches, whispering quietly, waiting for the next case to begin. Lawyers in their polished suits walked confidently, carrying thick files. Some of them had assistants by their side, typing notes quickly. The judge entered the room with an air of authority, his robe flowing as he took his seat behind the high desk. Everyone in the room stood as a sign of respect, and when he motioned, they sat back down. Among the crowd, a woman entered quietly. She was dressed in very simple clothes, the kind that would not draw any attention. Her hair was tied back in a plain bun, and she carried no heavy files, no briefcase, and no assistant followed her. She looked almost out of place in a room filled with people trying to show power and wealth. A few lawyers looked at her and smirked, whispering among themselves. They thought she might have walked into the wrong place or maybe was there as a family member of someone on trial. The woman did not react to any of the whispers. She walked calmly to the front and sat with a family that looked nervous. The family members were clearly not rich. Their clothes were worn, and their faces carried the worry of people fighting against something bigger than themselves. The father's hands shook as he held some papers, the mother tried to comfort her children, and the children looked scared. The woman gave them a small smile, a smile that said, "Don't worry. I'm here." The judge noticed her and raised his eyebrows. He looked at her from head to toe and then at the family she sat with. His lips curled into a small, mocking smile. "And who might you be?" he asked loudly, his voice filling the room. Everyone turned to look at the woman. She stood up politely. "I'm here to represent the family, Your Honor," she said in a calm voice. The judge laughed lightly, shaking his head. "Represent? Do you even know what that means?" His tone was sharp and sarcastic. A few lawyers chuckled quietly, enjoying the scene. The family's faces dropped, embarrassed by the judge's words. The mother lowered her eyes, wishing the ground would swallow her up. But the woman stayed calm. She nodded once and simply said, "Yes, Your Honor. I know exactly what it means." The judge leaned back in his chair, still looking at her with doubt. "Well," he said slowly, "this court is not a place for amateurs. Do you have any qualifications? Any files? Any notes? Or are you just here to waste everyone's time?" More laughter rippled through the room. The corporation's lawyers, sitting on the other side, smirked confidently. To them, this was already a win. Facing a woman who looked so plain, so unprepared, was no challenge. The woman looked at the judge respectfully and answered softly, "I am here because this family needs a voice. I will do my best to give it to them." Her words were simple, but there was something in her eyes that not many people noticed yet, a quiet fire, a hidden strength. The case began, and the corporation's lawyers stood up with confidence. They spoke loudly about how the company had done nothing wrong. They showed thick files, highlighted documents, and spoke in complicated legal terms that seemed impossible for an ordinary person to understand. The judge nodded along, clearly impressed by their performance. Every time the woman tried to speak, he cut her off, saying things like, "We'll get to you later," or "Let the professionals handle this first." The family grew more nervous as the minutes passed. The father whispered, "Maybe we shouldn't fight. Maybe we should just give up." The mother shook her head, but her eyes were full of tears. The children clung to their mother's arm, confused and scared. The woman leaned toward them and whispered, "Don't lose hope. Just wait." Her voice was so steady that it brought a little calm to the family. They didn't understand how she could be so confident when the judge himself seemed against her, but they trusted her. As the hearing went on, the judge made little jokes at her expense. At one point, he said, "This is not a classroom. This is a court of law." Another time he remarked, "Next time, maybe you should bring a real lawyer." Each time, the room filled with soft laughter. Some people shook their heads, feeling pity for the family who had placed their trust in someone who seemed so ordinary. But the woman never lost her calm. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't argue back rudely, and she didn't let the mocking words shake her. Instead, she kept her eyes on the corporation's lawyers, listening carefully to every detail they spoke. She took no notes, but her eyes followed their documents, her ears caught every small word, and she seemed to remember everything. The judge, convinced that she was out of her depth, moved the case along quickly. He wanted to wrap things up, already believing in his mind which side would win. After all, one side had professional lawyers, piles of evidence, and confidence. The other side had a simple woman with no files and no legal team. It looked like the result was already decided. But then, when the corporation's lawyer made a strong statement about how the family had no proof, the woman raised her hand politely. "Your Honor, may I speak now?" she asked. Her voice was not loud, but it carried across the room with surprising strength. The judge sighed dramatically. "Fine," he said. "Let's hear what you have to say. But keep it short. We don't have all day." The woman stood slowly, smoothing her simple dress, and stepped forward. The entire courtroom turned silent. For the first time, people actually focused on her words instead of her appearance. She looked directly at the judge and then at the corporation's lawyers. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Your Honor," she began, "the truth of this case does not lie in how many papers someone brings or how expensive their suit is. The truth lies in the facts. And if we take the time to look carefully, we will see the facts are very different from what has been presented so far." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The room that once laughed at her now grew still. Even the judge leaned forward, curious in spite of himself. The family's eyes widened with a spark of hope. The woman paused for a moment, letting the silence sink in. She knew this was just the beginning. What came next would surprise everyone in the room, including the very judge who had mocked her only minutes earlier. The room stayed silent after the woman's short but powerful words. For the first time, the mocking whispers had stopped. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned a little closer, as if he wasn't sure he had heard her correctly. The corporation's lawyers looked at her with narrowed eyes, trying to understand how this quiet woman had suddenly taken command of the room without even raising her voice. The family, who had been sitting with their heads lowered, now looked up with a little spark of hope. The company's lead lawyer, a tall man in an expensive suit, gave a confident smile. "Your Honor, with respect, this woman is wasting our time. She clearly has no documents, no files, and no legal standing here. I suggest we proceed with the real arguments." The judge nodded at first, almost agreeing, but then something about the calm confidence in the woman's face made him pause. "Go ahead," he said, waving his hand at her. "Let's hear what you have to say. But make it quick." The woman gave a polite nod. She stepped forward, her steps measured, her eyes steady. She had no paper in her hands, no thick binders, and yet she carried herself as if she had all the proof she needed. "Your Honor," she said, "this family is not here to waste anyone's time. They are here because they were wronged by a corporation that thought no one would stand against them. The lawyers on the other side are skilled, no doubt. They have papers, files, and resources. But what they do not have is the truth. And that is what matters here today." The family looked at her, almost shocked by how firm her voice sounded. For weeks, they had been told by neighbors, friends, and even strangers that fighting the company was hopeless. Everyone said they would be crushed in court. But here was this woman, dressed so simply, speaking with a power they had never seen before. The company's lawyer smirked. "Big words," he said. "But where are the facts?" He opened one of his binders and began reading. "The company has followed every regulation. The family signed contracts willingly. We have signatures, we have official stamps, and we have all the approvals. There is no case here." He slammed the binder shut and looked around proudly, certain the case was already won. The judge nodded along, clearly impressed by the lawyer's presentation. "It seems clear to me," he said. "This case looks very weak." He turned to the woman, almost ready to dismiss her again. "Do you have anything to say against that?" The woman took a breath and then spoke. "Yes, Your Honor. I do. Because what has been shown here is only half the truth." She turned to the company's lawyer. "You said the family signed contracts." "That is true. But did you also mention how those contracts were presented? Did you tell the court that the family cannot read complicated legal terms and was rushed to sign without proper explanation? Did you tell the court that the documents were written in language too complex for ordinary people to understand?" The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge raised an eyebrow. The people sitting in the gallery leaned forward, sensing something unusual was happening. The woman continued, her tone steady. "I may not be carrying a stack of papers, but I have carefully studied every detail of this case. This company made the family sign agreements they did not fully understand. That is not justice, Your Honor. That is manipulation." The judge frowned slightly. He was still skeptical but now less dismissive. He looked at the corporation's lawyer. "Is this true? Were the contracts explained properly?" The lawyer stammered, "Well, they signed voluntarily." "Voluntarily," the woman interrupted gently, yet firmly. "How voluntary is it when the choice is between signing a paper you don't understand or losing your home? How voluntary is it when the company representative stands at your door, pressuring you with threats of eviction? That is not a choice. That is coercion." The family's eyes filled with tears. They remembered that terrible day clearly. The company representatives had come with clipboards and strong voices, telling them to sign immediately or face consequences. At the time, they had felt powerless. The judge looked thoughtful now. The laughter that once filled the courtroom was gone. The gallery was silent, hanging on every word. The woman pressed on. "Your Honor, the law is not only about documents. It is about fairness. And fairness cannot exist when the weaker side is bullied into silence." She turned slightly, looking directly at the company's lawyer. "You want to talk about facts? Let's talk about the fact that this company increased the family's payments without notice. Let's talk about the fact that the family's electricity was cut off for days as a way to pressure them. Let's talk about the fact that their complaints were ignored." The lawyer tried to object, his voice rising, but the judge raised his hand. "Let her continue," he said. For the first time, there was seriousness in his voice. The woman nodded respectfully and continued. "This family came here not because they enjoy courtrooms, but because they had no other choice. They don't have money for powerful lawyers. They don't have influence. All they have is the hope that this court will listen to the truth." The gallery was buzzing now with quiet whispers. Some nodded in agreement, some looked shocked. The corporation's lawyers began to shuffle their papers nervously, suddenly less confident than before. The judge leaned back, rubbing his chin. "Do you have any evidence of these claims?" he asked carefully. The woman smiled softly. "Yes, Your Honor. And I will present it. But before that, I want to ask a simple question: why is it that when a rich man speaks, we call it evidence, but when a poor family speaks, we call it a story? Why do we trust the papers prepared by corporations but ignore the voices of those who suffer under them? Isn't the job of this court to give equal weight to both?" The question struck the room like a thunderclap. Even the judge looked unsettled. He had mocked her only an hour ago, but now her words made him pause. He knew she was right. Too often, cases were decided not by truth but by appearance and wealth. The family felt a new kind of strength flowing into them. They sat straighter, no longer ashamed, because this woman was standing up for them in a way no one ever had. The children, who had been afraid, now looked at her with wide eyes filled with admiration. The corporation's lawyer tried once again to regain control. "This is emotional nonsense. Courts run on facts, not feelings. The woman turned to him with calm eyes. Then let's talk about your facts, she said. In your own documents, you claimed the family missed payments on certain dates. But here she held up a small receipt as proof that they paid on time. And not just once. I have more receipts here from local shops that show they made payments every single month. Your documents are incomplete. Or perhaps, they are something worse. The lawyer's face went pale. He hadn't expected her to produce anything. The judge reached out for the receipts, studying them carefully. His face grew serious. He looked at the lawyer. How do you explain this? The lawyer stuttered, but no clear answer came out. The woman stood tall, her presence filling the room. Your Honor, this is just the beginning. I will show you piece by piece how the corporation twisted facts, hid information, and tried to crush this family under the weight of fear. But today, they will be heard. Today, their truth will stand in this courtroom. The judge sat in silence, unable to dismiss her words anymore. The gallery erupted in quiet murmurs, astonished by what they had just witnessed. And as the family looked at the woman, they no longer saw her as just a simple stranger. To them, she was their only hope, and she was fighting with more strength than anyone they had ever met. The tension inside the courtroom grew heavier with every passing minute. People who had first laughed at the woman now leaned forward, eager to hear her next words. The corporation's lawyers, once so sure of themselves, looked less comfortable. Their papers shuffled noisily, their voices lowered as they whispered to each other, trying to come up with a new plan. The judge, who had mocked her in the beginning, now sat upright, listening carefully. The woman stood tall, her presence quiet but powerful. She didn't need to shout, she didn't need fancy clothes, and she didn't need a large legal team behind her. Her calmness was enough to make the courtroom pay attention. She took a deep breath, glanced at the nervous family behind her, and then fixed her eyes back on the opposing lawyers. Your Honor, she said, I would like to cross-examine their witnesses. The lead lawyer laughed nervously, trying to brush her off. Cross-examine? You don't even. But before he could finish, the judge raised his hand. She has the right to question them. Call the witness. The first witness was a man in a suit, a representative of the corporation. He walked confidently to the stand, clearly believing he could handle her. He had been coached well by the corporation's lawyers. He raised his hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down with a small smirk on his face. The woman walked slowly toward him. She didn't carry notes or papers. Instead, she looked him directly in the eye. Sir, she said softly, you were present when the family signed the contract, correct? Yes, he answered quickly, I was. And you explained every detail of the contract to them. Of course, the man said proudly. She tilted her head slightly. Did you explain it in simple language? Did you make sure they understood words like foreclosure, interest adjustments, or liquidated damages? The man hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough. The woman caught it immediately. Or did you hand them the papers and simply tell them to sign quickly if they wanted to keep their home? The courtroom murmured. The man's smirk disappeared. Well, I gave them the documents. The woman stepped closer. Yes or no? Did you explain every term clearly? The man swallowed hard. No, not every term. The gallery gasped. The family looked at each other in disbelief. The judge wrote something down quickly. The woman didn't stop there. She continued her questioning, pulling out small truths from the witness. Slowly, the man admitted that the company often rushed families to sign, that they avoided answering questions directly, and that sometimes they even used fear to get signatures. By the time she was done, the confident representative looked pale and defeated. The corporation's lawyers quickly tried to repair the damage, objecting loudly, but the judge overruled them. He was watching closely now, impressed by her sharp mind. The next witness was called, another employee of the corporation. This time, the woman's questions focused on payment records. "You said the family missed payments," she began calmly. "Can you show the exact dates they missed?" The witness flipped through his papers nervously. "Yes, they missed in June," the woman interrupted. She pulled out a receipt from her pocket. "But this receipt shows payment on June 12 at 9:15 in the morning. The shop owner signed it himself. How can you claim they missed it?" The witness stuttered. "Well, maybe the system didn't update, so it is possible," the woman said firmly, "that your company records are not accurate." The witness hesitated, then nodded slowly. The judge leaned forward. "Answer clearly. Yes or no?" "Yes," the witness admitted, his voice low. The gallery erupted into whispers again. People were now looking at the woman not as an outsider, but as someone extraordinary. Even those who had mocked her appearance were now whispering in awe. "Who is she? How does she know so much? She's destroying them one by one." The corporation's lawyers began to sweat. They whispered frantically among themselves, realizing that the case was slipping from their control. The woman turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, this is not about one missed payment or one rushed signature. This is about a pattern. A pattern of intimidation, manipulation, and dishonesty. This family was not treated as human beings deserving fairness. They were treated as obstacles to profit." The judge tapped his pen against his notebook. His face had lost the mocking smile. He looked serious, almost uneasy. The earlier arrogance in his tone was gone. The corporation's lead lawyer stood quickly, trying to regain ground. "Your Honor, this woman is twisting the story. She has no official standing in this case. She should not even be allowed to speak." The woman turned to him slowly. Her eyes locked onto his, calm yet piercing. "If truth has no standing," she said, "then what does? If defending the powerless is not allowed in this courtroom, then what is this courtroom for?" The judge fell silent. He had no answer. The gallery erupted in a low wave of agreement. The woman then revealed something that shocked the room. "Your Honor, I have studied not only this case but also past cases handled by this corporation. In more than half of them, families like this one were pushed out of their homes. Many of those cases had the same witness, the same rushed contracts, and the same missing payment records. This is not an accident. This is a practice." The gallery gasped again. Reporters in the back scribbled notes quickly. Even the bailiff, who usually stood like a statue, glanced at her in surprise. The judge looked stunned. He cleared his throat and asked, "And how do you know this?" The woman took a deep breath. She had been waiting for this moment. "Because I investigated. Because I care about the truth. And because I have spent years studying cases like this. I may look simple, but I assure you, I know the law better than most standing in this room." The gallery went completely silent. Even the corporation's lawyers froze. The judge stared at her, speechless. The family behind her started to cry quietly, but this time they were tears of relief, not fear. The woman turned to the family, giving them a gentle nod, then faced the courtroom again. "This case is not only about them. It is about every family that has been silenced, every poor man or woman who felt powerless in the face of wealth and influence. Today, they finally have a voice." The silence stretched, heavy and powerful. For the first time in years, the judge himself felt small in his chair. He realized the woman standing before him was no ordinary person. She had a mind sharper than any lawyer he had seen in a long time. And she was using it to fight for justice, not for profit. The corporation's lawyers sat back, defeated for the moment, their earlier arrogance gone. The judge leaned back in his chair, his face pale. His earlier mockery now hung over him like a shadow of shame. The woman stood tall, calm, and unshaken. She had only just begun, but already she had shifted the entire balance of the trial. Everyone in the courtroom now knew the truth: she was not a simple woman at all. She was something far greater, and the full weight of her genius was only starting to show. The courtroom had changed. Only hours ago, it was filled with laughter and mocking smiles aimed at the simple woman who dared to stand up against a powerful corporation. Now, those same people sat in silence, leaning forward, waiting for her every word. The judge, who once mocked her openly, now studied her carefully, his pen moving quickly across the paper, noting every point she made. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of truth, and even the walls of the old courtroom seemed to listen. The corporation's lawyers gathered in a huddle during a short recess. They whispered furiously, their faces tense. The lead lawyer's forehead was damp with sweat, his earlier arrogance gone. "Who is she?" he hissed at his team. "She knows too much. This isn't normal." Another lawyer shook his head. "I don't know. She came out of nowhere. But the way she speaks, the laws she quotes, the evidence she pulls out, this isn't an amateur. She's something else." Meanwhile, the woman sat calmly with the family. She didn't speak much, only reassured them with gentle nods. The mother of the family wiped her tears, whispering, "We thought we had no chance. But you're giving us hope again." The woman placed a comforting hand on hers. "Justice is slow," she said softly, "but it always comes. Stay strong." When the judge returned and the court resumed, the corporation's lawyers tried to strike back. They brought in new arguments, new documents, and spoke with louder voices, as if volume could make up for their lack of truth. They painted the family as irresponsible, saying they didn't keep records properly, that they signed willingly, and that the company had every right to act as it did. The judge listened, nodding slowly, but his eyes kept drifting to the woman. When the lawyers finished, she stood up again. Her steps were calm, her voice steady, and yet she carried more weight than all of them combined. "Your Honor," she began, "it is time the truth of who I am is shared, because it matters to this case." She paused, letting the room grow silent again. "I am not just a supporter of this family. I am an attorney. My name is known in other courts, though I do not use it often. For the past several years, I have been working undercover, watching how ordinary people are treated in places of justice." Gasps filled the room. The family looked at her with wide eyes. The gallery erupted into whispers. The judge blinked, shocked by her words. You are an attorney?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied with quiet dignity. "A licensed attorney. I have handled cases far larger than this one. I chose to come here dressed simply, without my usual team or files, because I wanted to see how this court would treat a woman who appeared to be powerless. And what I witnessed only confirmed what I feared. From the moment I entered, I was mocked, laughed at, and told I didn't belong. But the law, Your Honor, does not belong to those with the finest suits. It belongs to everyone. And I am here to make sure this family receives it." The judge's face turned red. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier mocking words now echoing in his own mind. He looked around the room and saw the knowing stares of people who had heard him belittle her. His pride burned, but deeper inside, a sense of shame began to grow. The corporation's lawyers looked stunned. Their lead lawyer tried to object. "This is absurd. She should have declared her identity at the start." The woman turned her sharp gaze toward him. "And if I had," she asked, "would you or the judge have mocked me then? Or would you have listened from the beginning? My disguise was not to trick the court, it was to reveal the truth about how quickly people judge others based on appearance. And today, that truth stands as clear as this case." The gallery erupted in applause, something rarely seen in a courtroom. The judge banged his gavel, demanding silence, but the clapping did not stop immediately. Reporters scribbled faster, capturing every word. Cameras from the local press clicked as the story took on a life of its own. The woman continued. This family was not only wronged by the corporation, but also disrespected by the system meant to protect them. That ends today. She then pulled out more evidence: photographs of the family's home, records of electricity being cut, and letters the company had ignored. Piece by piece, she laid it before the judge, each document tearing down the corporation's defense. She quoted case law after case law, weaving together a net of truth so tight that the opposing lawyers could not escape. The corporation's lead lawyer tried to argue, but his words fell flat. Every time he raised a point, she countered with stronger proof. Every time he tried to twist the story, she straightened it back with facts. His voice grew weaker, his confidence crumbling before everyone's eyes. The family sat stunned, tears streaming down their faces. The father whispered to his children, "That's our lawyer, that's our hero." The judge, though still shaken by his earlier behavior, could not deny what was happening. The courtroom that had once laughed at her was now in awe of her brilliance. He cleared his throat and said, "This court recognizes the woman as an attorney. Continue with your arguments." The woman bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor. But the arguments are already clear. This corporation used fear, dishonesty, and power to break down a poor family. That is not justice. And if this court allows it to continue, then this court itself is failing its duty." Her words echoed through the room. No one dared to laugh anymore. The weight of her presence was undeniable. As she sat down, the family reached for her hands. The mother whispered, "You saved us." But the woman shook her head softly. "Not yet. Justice still has to be delivered." The corporation's lawyers sat in silence, their defeat heavy in the air. The judge leaned back in his chair, his mind turning over everything that had happened. He knew the truth now, and though it pained his pride, he had to admit it. The woman he mocked as simple was in fact one of the sharpest attorneys he had ever faced. The day was not over, but the outcome was already beginning to show. And as the gavel struck to pause the session, everyone in the room knew one thing for certain: nothing in that courtroom would ever be the same again. The next morning, the courtroom was more crowded than ever. Word of what had happened the previous day had spread across the city. Reporters, curious onlookers, and even law students filled the benches, eager to witness the final round of this unusual trial. Everyone wanted to see the so-called simple woman who had revealed herself as a brilliant attorney and had turned the case upside down. The family sat nervously, their hands clasped together. They had spent the night barely sleeping, half afraid that it was all a dream. But when the woman entered the courtroom, walking with the same calm grace as before, their fears melted away. She gave them a small, reassuring smile. They knew then that whatever happened, they were no longer alone. The corporation's lawyers looked less confident that day. Their suits were still expensive, their ties neat, but their faces betrayed their worry. They had tried all night to prepare new arguments, to find some weakness in her case. But deep down, they knew the tide had already turned. The judge entered the courtroom, his expression serious. He did not look at the woman with the same mocking smile as before. Instead, his eyes carried a mixture of respect and discomfort. He remembered how he had laughed at her, how he had questioned her presence, and now the shame weighed on him heavily. The session began. The corporation's lead lawyer stood up first, his voice less confident than before. He tried to argue that the woman had no right to present new evidence since she had entered the case under unusual circumstances. He tried to suggest that her disguise as a simple woman was a trick meant to mislead the court. But his words sounded hollow. The gallery did not react with nods or murmurs of agreement. Instead, people frowned, sensing desperation. The judge cleared his throat. "Proceed with your arguments," he said, but even his voice lacked conviction. The lawyer shuffled his papers and presented charts, documents, and numbers, trying to prove that the corporation's actions were justified. But every time he raised a point, the woman rose gracefully and countered it. When he said the family had failed to meet payments, she calmly produced receipts that proved otherwise. When he claimed the corporation had followed all legal rules, she cited cases from other courts showing the same company had been fined for similar behavior. When he tried to accuse the family of being careless, she reminded the court that the law protects everyone, especially the vulnerable, not just the powerful. Her words were clear and simple, but each one cut deeper than the most polished speech. She did not hide behind complicated legal terms. She spoke so plainly that even the children in the courtroom understood her points. The judge leaned forward, listening carefully. The gallery was silent, no one dared to whisper. The power of truth had taken over the room. Finally, the woman turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, yesterday I revealed that I am an attorney. Today, I stand not only as an attorney but as a voice for all those who cannot afford one. This family is not just fighting for themselves, they are fighting for every poor man, every poor woman who has been silenced by fear. If the law cannot protect them, then what good is it?" Her voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in strength. Justice must not bow to wealth. It must not bend to power. Justice must stand tall for the weakest among us. Because if it doesn't, then it isn't justice at all. The family broke down in tears. The father held his children tightly, the mother covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by emotion. The gallery erupted in applause, unable to hold back. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, but even he could not hide the respect in his eyes. When the applause died down, the judge took a long breath. He looked at the corporation's lawyers, then at the family, then finally at the woman. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. He remembered every mocking word he had spoken to her, every dismissive gesture, and now he felt the sting of regret. "This court has heard enough," he said at last. His voice was steady, but softer than usual. "The evidence presented shows a clear pattern of manipulation and dishonesty by the corporation. The family did not miss payments. They were pressured into signing documents they did not understand. They were treated unfairly and unlawfully. Therefore, this court rules in favor of the family." Gasps filled the room, followed by loud clapping. The corporation's lawyers slumped in their seats, defeated. The family cried openly, hugging each other tightly. The children clung to their mother, who kept whispering, "We won. We finally won." The judge paused, then looked directly at the woman. His face was red, his pride wounded, but he forced the words out. "And to you. I owe an apology. Yesterday, I mocked you. I judged you by your appearance. I assumed you did not belong in this court. I was wrong. Today, you reminded us all what justice truly means. And for that, I am humbled." The gallery grew silent again, stunned by the judge's words. Never before had they seen a judge apologize so openly in court. The woman bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor. But I don't need your apology. What matters is that this family has received justice. Let that be the lesson today, that we must never underestimate people by how they look." The judge nodded slowly, his eyes lowered in respect. As the session ended, the courtroom was filled with applause once more. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashed, and questions flew through the air. But the woman did not bask in the attention. She turned back to the family, helping them gather their few papers. The children hugged her legs, refusing to let go. "You saved us," the father said, his voice shaking. She smiled gently. "No. You saved yourselves. You chose to fight when everything told you to give up. I only gave you the voice you already had inside." The family cried and hugged her tightly. The gallery looked on, many wiping their own tears. The judge, still seated, watched her quietly. He knew he would never forget this day. The lesson she had given him about humility, about justice, about respect would stay with him for the rest of his career. As the woman walked out of the courtroom, people moved aside, giving her space. Some nodded in respect, others whispered her name, and a few even clapped softly as she passed. But she didn't stop to accept their praise. She walked with the same calm steps she had taken when she first entered, simple and quiet, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everyone knew the truth. A day earlier, she had been mocked as a simple woman. Now, she was remembered as the genius attorney who stood up for justice and changed everything. And though she left the courtroom without fanfare, the echo of her words lingered in every heart: justice belongs to all, not just to the powerful. The family left the courthouse with tears of joy, their heads held high for the first time in months. The corporation's lawyers slipped away quietly, defeated and humiliated. And the judge, still seated at his bench, whispered to himself, "Never again will I underestimate someone by how they appear." The story spread quickly across the city. Newspapers printed headlines about the disguised attorney who humbled a corporation and even the judge himself. People spoke of her courage in markets, offices, and homes. For many, she became a symbol of hope, a reminder that no matter how simple one may look, true strength lies in knowledge, courage, and justice. And somewhere, away from the spotlight, the woman sat quietly with a cup of tea, watching the sunrise. She did not crave recognition. She only cared that justice had been served. For her, that was enough.